Jungkook whispers, "My husband," to Jimin's reflection in secret. But one unexpected moment exposes the truth that changes everything forever. The mirror shattered before Jungkook could even breathe. The sharp crack echoed through the silent room like a gunshot, scattering glittering fragments across the polished wooden floor. Every broken piece reflected a different version of his terrified face, and in each reflection, Jimin's image lingered behind him as though refusing to disappear. Jungkook instinctively stepped backward, his pulse hammering against his ribs. His hand flew to his chest where, hidden beneath his sweater, a simple silver ring rested on a thin chain around his neck. It was the only object he never removed, even while sleeping. He clenched it so tightly that the cool metal pressed painfully into his skin. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood from the old bookshelf, mixed with the sharp scent of dust released by the fallen mirror. Outside, rain drummed steadily against the windows, turning the afternoon into a world painted in silver and gray. "Jungkook," Jimin's voice drifted from the hallway, calm yet laced with concern. "Did something happen?" Jungkook closed his eyes for one desperate second. His heartbeat seemed loud enough to answer before he could. "I'm fine," he replied, forcing his voice into a casual tone that sounded unfamiliar even to himself. He quickly knelt to collect the broken glass, hopping to erase every trace of what had just happened. His fingers trembled as they reached for the largest fragment. In its surface, his own reflection stared back, but something felt wrong. The reflected Jungkook was smiling gently, while the real one was frozen in fear. Before he could understand what he was seeing, the reflection silently formed two words with its lips. "My husband." Jungkook's breath caught. The shard slipped from his fingers and sliced across his palm. Bright crimson blood flowed onto the mirror fragment, spreading like scarlet ink over frozen water. The reflected smile disappeared instantly. A knock came again, softer this time. "I'm coming in," Jimin said. Jungkook barely had enough time to push the bloodied shard beneath a nearby cabinet before the door opened. Jimin stepped inside carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His damp black hair suggested he had just come in from the rain. Tiny droplets still clung to the ends of his hair, catching the warm light from the ceiling lamp. He paused the moment he noticed the broken mirror. "What happened?" His voice lowered. Jungkook looked away. "I dropped it." Jimin's eyes slowly traveled downward until they found the blood dripping from Jungkook's hand. Without asking another question, he immediately placed the mugs on the desk and hurried over. "You're hurt. It's just a scratch. Stop pretending." Jimin gently reached for his wrist. His touch was warm, steady, impossibly comforting. Jungkook tried to pull away out of instinct, but Jimin's grip remained surprisingly firm. Their eyes met. For a brief second, the noise of the rain disappeared entirely. There was only silence and the warmth of another person's concern. Jimin carefully wrapped Jungkook's injured hand with a clean white cloth taken from a nearby drawer. His movements were practiced, almost automatic, as though he had done this countless times before. "You always hide when you're hurting," Jimin whispered without looking up. "Even over something small." Jungkook forced a smile. "Old habit. Habits are usually born from old fears." Those words settled heavily between them. Jungkook couldn't answer because Jimin was right. Since childhood, he had learned to hide everything. His fears, his dreams, his tears, and most of all, the impossible love he carried every single day. Loving Jimin had become another carefully guarded habit, buried beneath years of laughter, friendship, and silence. Jimin finally finished tying the bandage. "There." His smile was soft. "Better." Jungkook stared at the neat knot around his hand. It looked strangely familiar. "Where did you learn to tie it like that?" he asked quietly. Jimin blinked. "I don't know." He frowned slightly. "It just feels natural." Jungkook's heart skipped. That exact knot had been taught only by Jungkook's late grandfather, who believed every knot carried a promise. Years ago, Jungkook had shown it to only one person during a summer evening they both barely remembered, or perhaps only Jungkook remembered. Before either of them could speak again, a phone resting on the desk suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Neither of them moved at first. The vibration continued until Jimin glanced at it. "Aren't you going to answer?" Jungkook hesitated before picking it up. The moment he pressed the speaker button, an elderly man's calm voice filled the room. "Mr. Jian," the stranger said, "the restoration of the old marriage records has finally been completed. There is something you need to see immediately." Jungkook's blood ran cold. His eyes widened in disbelief while Jimin stood beside him, confused by the sudden change in his expression. The rain outside intensified, washing against the windows as though trying to drown out the words that neither of them truly understood, while the silver ring hidden beneath Jungkook's sweater suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Jungkook ended the call before another word could escape the stranger's lips. The room fell into a silence so complete that even the ticking clock above the bookshelf sounded deafening. Jimin looked at him with quiet curiosity, searching his face for an explanation that never came. Jungkook slipped the phone into his pocket and forced a smile that barely reached his eyes. "Just a mistake," he said. Jimin studied him for another moment before nodding, though the doubt lingering in his gaze remained impossible to hide. He had known Jungkook long enough to recognize the tiny changes. The way his right thumb rubbed against the edge of his sleeve whenever he lied, the slight tension in his jaw whenever he buried his emotions, the way his breathing became almost inaudible whenever he was protecting someone. Today, every one of those habits appeared at once. Outside, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle. Pale sunlight began slipping through the clouds, casting shimmering reflections across the broken pieces of glass still scattered beneath the cabinet. Jungkook quickly bent down to gather them before Jimin could notice the largest shard. He reached beneath the cabinet, but his fingers froze. The blood-stained fragment had disappeared. His heartbeat stumbled. He searched again, pushing aside a forgotten notebook and an old storage box. Nothing. The mirror piece had vanished as though it had never existed. "Looking for something?" Jimin asked. Jungkook straightened immediately. "No." His voice sounded too sharp. Jimin tilted his head unconvinced, yet chose not to press further. Instead, he picked up the 2 mugs of coffee that had grown lukewarm. "Come on," he said softly. "You need fresh air." Half an hour later, they were walking through a quiet park still glistening from the rain. Water clung to every leaf, sparkling beneath the returning sunlight like tiny crystals. The scent of wet earth and pine drifted through the air, soothing everyone except Jungkook. His mind replayed the mysterious phone call over and over. Marriage records. Restoration completed. Something you need to see. He had spent years convincing himself that some secrets should remain buried forever. Apparently, fate had different plans. Jimin strolled beside him with his hands tucked into the pockets of his long coat. Unlike Jungkook, he seemed fascinated by the peaceful afternoon. He occasionally paused to watch birds splash inside rain puddles or admire flowers bending beneath droplets of water. There was something comforting about the way he noticed beauty in ordinary moments. It was one of the countless reasons Jungkook had fallen in love with him. "Can I ask you something?" Jimin suddenly broke the silence. Jungkook nodded. "Do you ever feel like you've forgotten an important part of your life?" Jungkook nearly stopped walking. "Why would you ask that?" Jimin looked ahead rather than at him. "Lately, I've been having strange dreams." A chill traveled through Jungkook's spine. "Dreams, they always begin the same way." Jimin's voice became quieter. "There's an old chapel covered with white flowers. Someone is standing beside me, but I can never see his face. I only hear his voice." Jungkook's fingers curled tightly inside his coat pocket. "What does he say?" Jimin smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "He calls me." He hesitated before laughing awkwardly. "It sounds ridiculous. Tell me." "He calls me my husband." Time itself seemed to stop. The breeze disappeared. The distant laughter of children vanished. Even the birds resting on nearby branches became motionless in Jungkook's perception. He stared at Jimin, unable to breathe. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck, clearly confused by his own words. "Weird, right? I wake up every time after hearing it. The strange thing is..." He looked down at his own empty left hand. "Whenever I have that dream, I feel like I'm missing a ring I was supposed to be wearing." Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. Deep inside his sweater, the silver ring hanging around his neck rested against his heart like a silent confession. Before he could answer, an elderly woman feeding pigeons nearby suddenly turned toward them. Her basket slipped from her hands, scattering birdseed across the stone path. She stared directly at Jungkook and Jimin with wide, trembling eyes. Tears instantly filled them. "It can't be," she whispered. Her voice shook as she slowly approached. "After all these years." She stopped only a few steps away and raised a trembling hand toward them. "You too. You look exactly the same." Jimin blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" The elderly woman smiled through her tears. "Not in this lifetime," she replied gently. "But I attended your wedding once, long ago." Jungkook felt every ounce of color drain from his face. The wind suddenly swept through the park, carrying with it the scent of blooming lilies from a nearby garden. a fragrance that awakened a memory he had spent years trying to forget. Somewhere deep within his heart, a forgotten promise stirred once more, refusing to remain silent any longer. The old woman's words lingered in the air long after the breeze had faded. Jungkook stood perfectly still, his pulse pounding in his ears, while Jimin frowned in polite confusion. Around them, pigeons fluttered back to the ground, pecking calmly at the scattered seeds as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The contrast felt almost surreal. "I'm afraid you've mistaken us for someone else," Jimin said gently, offering the elderly woman a reassuring smile. She slowly shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Old eyes may grow weak, but a heart never forgets the people it once prayed for." There was no madness in her expression, only certainty. Jungkook swallowed. The woman's gaze drifted toward the silver chain hidden beneath Jungkook's sweater. She couldn't possibly see the ring tucked underneath, yet her eyes rested exactly where it lay. "You still carry it," she murmured. Jungkook instinctively stepped back. Jimin noticed the movement immediately. "Carry what?" The woman seemed to awaken from a dream. She blinked several times before lowering her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Perhaps I shouldn't have spoken." She bent down with surprising patience, collecting the remaining birdseed into her worn basket. Her hands were wrinkled, yet every movement carried quiet elegance. Jimin crouched beside her to help. "You don't have to apologize." She smiled warmly at him. "You've always been kind." Jimin laughed awkwardly. "I think you're remembering someone much better looking than me." The old woman chuckled softly. "No." Her eyes shimmered. "I'm remembering someone who loved without asking for anything in return." Jungkook looked away. Those words pierced him more deeply than he wanted to admit. After helping her gather everything, Jimin handed back the basket. "May I know your name?" "My name is Hana." She paused before adding quietly, "Your grandmother used to call me her little sister." Jungkook's breath caught. "My grandmother." Hana nodded. "We grew up together." His mind raced. His grandmother had passed away years ago. She had rarely spoken about her youth, and whenever Jungkook asked about old photographs stored in dusty boxes, she always smiled mysteriously before changing the subject. "There were stories," Hana continued, her voice distant with memory. "Stories about promises people thought were impossible." Jungkook forced himself to remain calm. "What promises?" She looked at him for several silent seconds. Then she smiled sadly. "The kind that survive longer than memory." Without another explanation, Hana turned and slowly walked away beneath rows of rain-soaked maple trees. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. Only after her figure disappeared did Jimin exhale. "That was strange," Jungkook finished. "Very." They continued, walking through the park. Neither noticed the small, folded photograph lying beneath the bench Hana had occupied moments earlier. A gust of wind lifted one corner. Jungkook's eyes caught it. He bent down and picked it up. The paper was yellow with age. Its edges had become soft from decades of careful handling. He slowly turned it over. His heart nearly stopped. The photograph showed two young men standing in front of a tiny stone chapel covered in blooming white roses. One of them wore a dark suit. The other smiled while holding a bouquet of lilies. Their faces looked astonishingly familiar. Not identical, but close enough to send chills through Jungkook's entire body. Jimin leaned closer. "That's..." He couldn't finish. Something inside him stirred. A strange ache spread across his chest. "I've seen this place before." Jungkook looked at him. "You have?" "I don't know where." Jimin gently touched the photograph with his fingertips. "But every time I look at it..." His voice became barely audible. "It feels like home." On the back of the picture, elegant handwriting had faded with time. Only a few words remained readable. Love remembers what memory forgets. Below the sentence were two initials, J and J. Neither surname remained visible. Jimin stared silently at the message. His heartbeat became uneven. A faint ringing echoed inside his ears. Suddenly, images flashed across his mind. White flower petals dancing through sunlight. Church bells ringing joyfully. Warm fingers intertwined with his own. Someone laughing softly beside him. A familiar voice whispering, "My husband." Jimin gasped. The photograph slipped from his trembling hands. He pressed both palms against his temples as another wave of fragmented memories crashed into him. His breathing became shallow. The park disappeared beneath a blur of light. He could almost smell fresh lilies, hear distant wedding vows, feel tears warming his cheeks despite not understanding why. Jimin. Jungkook caught him before he collapsed. Their eyes met. For one suspended heartbeat, neither spoke. Jimin searched Jungkook's face as though seeing it for the very first time. Or perhaps, remembering it after an impossibly long time. His lips trembled. Why do I feel? A single tear rolled down his cheek. Like I've been waiting for you my whole life. Jungkook couldn't answer. Because the same question had haunted him every single day. Jungkook's heart pounded so violently that he could hear nothing else. The world around him blurred into streaks of green and gold as the afternoon sun filtered through the rain-soaked trees. Jimin was still in his arms, his breathing uneven, his eyes shimmering with confusion and an emotion neither of them could explain. "I don't understand," Jimin whispered. His voice was fragile, almost childlike. "I've never been here before, so why does everything feel familiar?" Jungkook looked into Jimin's eyes and saw something he had not dared hope for. Recognition. Not complete. Not conscious. But something buried deep inside Jimin had begun to awaken. "It's all right," Jungkook said softly. "You don't have to force yourself to remember." Jimin lowered his gaze. But what if those memories matter? Jungkook wanted to answer. Instead, silence escaped his lips. Because he knew exactly how dangerous memories could become once they found their way back. A cool breeze carried the scent of blooming lilies through the park once again. Jimin suddenly closed his eyes. Another image flashed before him. A pair of hands fastening a silver ring onto his finger. Warm laughter. Sunlight pouring through colorful stained glass windows. A voice trembling with happiness. "I promise, in every lifetime." Jimin opened his eyes immediately. His chest tightened. He instinctively reached toward Jungkook's sweater. His fingertips stopped just above the fabric, covering the hidden silver chain. "I feel like..." His breathing grew shallow. "There's something here." Jungkook froze. Every instinct told him to step back. Instead, he remained perfectly still. Slowly, almost unconsciously, Jimin's fingers brushed against Jungkook's chest. The small silver ring hanging beneath the sweater gently struck against Jungkook's heartbeat. Jimin inhaled sharply. His entire body trembled. "I know this," he whispered. "I've touched this ring before." Jungkook finally caught Jimin's hand. His grip was gentle. "You couldn't have. But it feels real." "It isn't." The answer came too quickly. Too firmly. Jimin searched his face. "You're lying." Jungkook closed his eyes. Not because he wanted to. Because he couldn't bear the disappointment that might appear in Jimin's eyes if the truth surfaced too soon. "I've known you for years," Jimin continued quietly. "You always smile when you're protecting someone." He squeezed Jungkook's hand. "And today, you're protecting me." The words struck deeper than any accusation. Jungkook slowly released a shaky breath. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated once again. The same unknown number. He hesitated. Jimin noticed. You should answer. Jungkook finally accepted the call. The elderly man's calm voice returned. Mr. Jian. I'm listening. There has been another discovery. Jungkook's heartbeat slowed. The restoration team found an unopened letter hidden inside the old chapel. His throat tightened. The letter is addressed to. A brief pause followed. Both of you. Jungkook's fingers stiffened around the phone. What do you mean? The envelope bears 2 names. The old man's voice remained steady. Jungkook. Another pause. And Jimin. Silence engulfed everything. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Jimin watched Jungkook's face lose every trace of color. How old is the letter? Jungkook finally managed to ask. It appears to be more than 60 years old. Jungkook couldn't breathe. Impossible. Perhaps. The old man answered calmly. But impossible things leave behind very real evidence. The call ended. Neither man spoke. The breeze gently lifted the ancient photograph from the grass. It landed beside Jimin's shoes. He picked it up once more. This time, his eyes noticed something hidden near the lower corner. Tiny writing that had escaped them earlier. He carefully brushed away a thin layer of dirt. More words appeared. Open the final letter, only when love finds you again. Jimin read the sentence twice. Something inside him trembled. He looked toward Jungkook. Without thinking. Without understanding why. He reached out and quietly intertwined his fingers with Jungkook's. The gesture felt effortless. Natural. Like a habit that had never disappeared. Neither of them pulled away. They simply stood together beneath the fatting afternoon sky, while countless questions circled silently between them. Far beyond the park, hidden among dense forests at the edge of an abandoned mountain village, an old stone chapel stood untouched by time. Its weathered wooden doors remained locked. Inside, beneath layers of dust and forgotten prayers, a single ivory envelope rested inside a carved wooden altar. Across its faded surface, written in elegant handwriting that had survived decades, were only 6 words. For my husband, when we meet again. The evening sky faded into deep shades of violet as Jungkook and Jimin drove toward the mountain village in complete silence. The windshield reflected streaks of orange and crimson from the setting sun, while the rhythmic sound of the tires rolling across the wet road filled the spaces where words refused to exist. Neither of them mentioned the letter. Neither of them mentioned the chapel. Yet both understood that every kilometer carried them closer to a truth neither had ever imagined. Jimin rested his head against the passenger side window, watching forests slide past like shadows. The scenery should have looked unfamiliar. Instead, every curve in the road awakened an unexplainable sense of recognition. There should be a lake after the next hill, he murmured absent-mindedly. Jungkook glanced at him. You've never been here. I know. Jimin frowned. But, a minute later, the road curved gently. A quiet lake appeared exactly where Jimin had said it would. Jungkook tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Neither of them spoke. The silence grew heavier. As darkness slowly settled over the mountains, they finally reached the village. Only a handful of stone houses remained standing. Most had surrendered to time. Weathered rooftops leaned beneath thick blankets of moss. Old lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze. The scent of damp cedar drifted through the empty streets. Everything felt untouched, as though the village itself had been patiently waiting. Near the center stood the chapel. It was smaller than either of them expected. Its pale stone walls glowed softly beneath the moonlight. White climbing roses covered nearly every surface despite no one appearing to care for them. The flowers looked impossibly fresh. Jimin stared without blinking. I've seen this. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Jungkook slowly nodded. So have I. They approached together. Every footstep echoed across the ancient stone pathway. Before either of them reached the wooden doors, they creaked open by themselves. A warm breeze drifted outward, carrying the delicate fragrance of lilies. No one stood inside. Only rows of old wooden pews, faded stained glass windows, and countless floating dust particles illuminated by moonlight. The silence felt peaceful, not empty, welcoming. Near the altar waited the elderly man from the phone call. His silver hair reflected the soft candlelight surrounding him. He bowed politely. "You came." Jungkook nodded. "You called us." The old man smiled. "I knew you would." His eyes shifted toward Jimin. "And I hoped you would remember." Jimin looked around the chapel. "My memories. They're returning." The old man answered gently. "Not because someone forced them, but because your heart has begun recognizing what your mind forgot." He slowly walked toward the altar. Resting upon it lay the ivory envelope. Its paper had yellowed with age, yet the handwriting remained elegant. "For my husband, when we meet again." Jimin unconsciously reached toward it. His fingertips stopped only centimeters away. His entire body trembled. "I..." A sudden wave of emotion crashed through him. His breathing became uneven. The scent of lilies intensified. The distant sound of church bells echoed inside his mind. Not outside. Inside. Images poured into his consciousness. A smiling young man adjusting a dark suit. Hands exchanging silver rings. Soft laughter beneath blooming white roses. Snow falling outside stained glass windows. Two voices promising forever. Jimin staggered backward. Jungkook immediately caught him. Their eyes met once again. This time, something had changed. Jimin's gaze softened. His expression carried both wonder and sorrow. "I know your smile." His voice shook. "I've known it." He gently touched Jungkook's cheek. "It's longer than I can remember." A single tear escaped Jungkook's eyes. Years of carefully hidden emotions finally reached the surface. "I've waited," he whispered. "So long." Jimin searched his face with growing certainty. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jungkook lowered his eyes. "Because love shouldn't demand someone else's memories." The chapel remained silent. Even the candles seemed perfectly still. The elderly man watched quietly before speaking. "Some truths are discovered." He smiled gently. "Others are simply remembered." Jimin turned back toward the altar. This time, his fingers rested upon the envelope. The paper felt unexpectedly warm, like it had been waiting for his touch alone. Slowly, he broke the ancient wax seal. Inside rested a single handwritten letter, and two pressed white lily petals that had somehow retained their delicate fragrance after all these decades. Jimin unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was graceful, elegant. He began reading aloud. "If these words ever reach us again, then love has already done what time never could. Perhaps our names have changed. Perhaps our faces have changed. Perhaps the world around us no longer remembers the promises we made. But if your heart still becomes peaceful beside mine, if your hand still searches for mine without thinking, if hearing the words, 'my husband,' still makes you smile before it makes you question, then we have already found each other again. Do not fear forgotten years. Love has never measured time the way people do. It simply waits, patiently, faithfully, until home returns." Jimin's voice broke before he reached the end. Tears quietly rolled down both their faces. Neither of them tried to hide them. For the first time, there was nothing left to hide. The final words of the letter faded into the stillness of the chapel. No one spoke. The silence itself felt sacred, as though the old stone walls had absorbed every promise whispered within them over countless years. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering gentle colors across the wooden floor. Blue, crimson, gold, and violet merged around Jungkook and Jimin until they stood surrounded by shifting light that resembled flowing memories. Jimin lowered the letter with trembling hands. His eyes remained fixed on the elegant handwriting. Every curve of every sentence stirred something deep inside him. Not a complete memory. Not yet. But a feeling stronger than certainty. A feeling of belonging. He slowly looked toward Jungkook. "You've been carrying this alone." It wasn't a question. Jungkook smiled faintly. "For longer than I should have." "You knew." "I suspected." "You believed all this." Jungkook looked around the quiet chapel before answering. "I believed what my heart refused to forget." Jimin's eyes filled with tears once more. "So every time you looked at me, I saw the person who made ordinary days feel extraordinary. You never told me." "I was afraid." Jimin stepped closer. "Afraid of what?" "That if I spoke too soon." Jungkook's voice softened. "You would feel trapped by memories that weren't truly yours." A gentle breeze slipped through the slightly open chapel doors. The candle flames danced quietly. Jimin studied Jungkook's face. He noticed details he had somehow overlooked for years. The tiny scar near his eyebrow. The faint crease that appeared whenever he tried to hide sadness behind a smile. The habit of rubbing the silver ring beneath his sweater whenever he felt anxious. They were such small things, yet they felt infinitely familiar. Without saying another word, Jimin carefully reached toward Jungkook's neck. His fingers found the thin silver chain. Jungkook did not stop him. Slowly, Jimin lifted the chain over Jungkook's head. The small silver ring rested in his palm. It was beautifully simple. No jewels. No elaborate engraving. Only two initials carefully carved inside. J. J. Jimin smiled through tears. "Our initials." Jungkook nodded. "I never had the courage to wear it openly." Jimin turned the ring between his fingers. As moonlight touched the inner surface, another hidden engraving became visible. A single sentence. "Always home." The moment Jimin read those words, another memory quietly returned. Not as a violent flash. Not as overwhelming confusion. But like sunrise after a long night. He remembered laughter echoing through a flower garden. He remembered nervous hands exchanging rings. He remembered promising never to let fear become stronger than love. And most vividly, he remembered looking into another pair of eyes, filled with the same quiet devotion now standing before him. Jimin laughed, softly despite the tears on his cheeks. "I finally understand." Jungkook blinked. "What?" "Why hearing those words never frightened me." "What words?" Jimin stepped close enough that only a breath separated them. "My husband." His voice carried warmth instead of surprise. Instead of confusion. There was acceptance. Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment. The words he had whispered only to a mirror had finally been spoken aloud without fear. Without secrecy. Without loneliness. Outside, the wind gently stirred the white roses climbing across the chapel walls. Their petals drifted through the open doorway like quiet blessings. The elderly man standing near the altar smiled to himself before silently leaving the chapel, allowing the two of them the privacy they deserved. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin noticed his departure. They remained standing together beneath the colored light. No dramatic declarations followed. No grand speeches. Only honesty. "I don't remember every detail," Jimin admitted. "And maybe I never will." Jungkook nodded. "You don't have to. But I know one thing." Jimin gently slipped the silver ring onto Jungkook's finger. It doesn't matter whether this is our first beginning or another chance. He intertwined their hands. I'm choosing you now. Jungkook looked at their joined hands. His smile trembled. And I'm choosing you. The weight that had rested on his heart for so many years quietly disappeared. Not because every mystery had been solved. Not because every forgotten memory had returned. But because love no longer depended on proving the past. It lived fully in the present. The chapel bells suddenly rang across the silent valley. Their clear voices rolled through the mountains, across forests, lakes, and sleeping villages. Far above, the clouds slowly parted. Thousands of stars filled the night sky. Jimin looked upward before quietly laughing. It feels like someone waited a very long time for this. Jungkook smiled. Maybe we did. They walked out of the chapel side by side. Behind them, moonlight illuminated the old wooden altar one last time. The ivory letter rested peacefully where it belonged. Its purpose had finally been fulfilled. The chapel doors slowly closed with a gentle whisper. The white roses continued blooming beneath the stars. And somewhere, beyond memory and beyond time, two promises made long ago had quietly become one future once again. Morning arrived quietly over the mountain village. Golden sunlight spilled across the chapel roof, turning every drop of dew on the white roses into tiny stars. A gentle breeze carried the fragrance of lilies through the valley, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jungkook woke without the familiar weight pressing against his chest. He stood outside the small guest house where they had spent the night, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands. Birds sang from the tall pine trees surrounding the village, their melodies blending with the distant murmur of a flowing stream. Behind him, the wooden door opened. Jimin stepped outside wearing an oversized cream-colored sweater, his hair still slightly messy from sleep. You disappeared. Jungkook smiled. I only wanted to watch the sunrise. Jimin walked beside him. So did I. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt shared. Comfortable. Complete. Jimin leaned lightly against the wooden fence overlooking the valley. I had another dream. Jungkook looked at him. This one wasn't confusing. What happened? Jimin smiled softly. We were walking. Where? I don't know. He laughed quietly. It didn't matter. There wasn't any wedding. No dramatic promises. We were simply walking together. Jungkook's expression warmed. And were we happy? Jimin looked toward the endless mountains glowing beneath the morning sun. Very. He paused. I think that's what love really looks like. Jungkook nodded. I think you're right. As they prepared to leave the village, the elderly man from the chapel approached them carrying a small wooden box. I believe this belongs to both of you now. Jungkook accepted it carefully. The wood was polished smooth despite its age. An intricate carving of intertwined lilies decorated the lid. There was nothing inside when we first found it, the old man explained. But after you opened the letter, he smiled gently. This appeared. Jimin lifted the lid. Inside rested two simple silver keys, tied together with a faded white ribbon. Alongside them lay a tiny handwritten note. Some doors are opened by memory. The most important ones are opened by trust. Jimin turned one of the keys over in his hand. What do they unlock? The elderly man slowly shook his head. I don't know. They were hidden beneath the altar. Perhaps they were never meant for anyone else. Jungkook carefully closed the box. Thank you. The old man bowed politely. My task ends here. He turned toward the chapel. Yours is only beginning. As their car disappeared down the winding mountain road, the village slowly faded behind them. Neither noticed the elderly man quietly placing fresh lilies beneath the chapel window before walking away with a peaceful smile. Hours later, they returned to the city. The familiar skyline rose before them, busy and ordinary. Traffic filled the streets. People hurried along sidewalks. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Not because the city had changed. Because they had. Jimin unlocked the front door to his apartment. The scent of fresh coffee beans and cedarwood greeted them. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Everything appeared exactly as they had left it. Almost. Jimin suddenly stopped. There wasn't a box here before. A small package rested neatly upon the coffee table, wrapped in ivory paper. No postage. No delivery label. Only a single handwritten sentence. Welcome home. Jungkook exchanged a puzzled glance with Jimin. Neither had told anyone about the chapel. Slowly, Jimin untied the ribbon. Inside rested a beautifully crafted wooden frame. Protected beneath clear glass was the restored photograph they had discovered in the park. Only now, the faded faces had been carefully restored. Two young men smiled beneath blooming white roses. Their hands were intertwined. The resemblance to Jungkook and Jimin was undeniable. On the back of the frame, another inscription had been added in elegant handwriting. Every love story deserves to be remembered. Jimin held the frame close. He smiled, not because he finally understood every mystery, but because he no longer needed to. He looked toward Jungkook. Can I ask you something? Anything. When you stood in front of that mirror. Jungkook froze. Jimin's smile grew warmer. You really called me my husband, didn't you? A faint blush spread across Jungkook's face. I thought no one heard. I didn't. Jimin stepped closer. But somehow, he gently rested his forehead against Jungkook's. My heart did. Jungkook laughed quietly. So I wasn't completely talking to myself. I don't think you ever were. Outside the apartment window, evening sunlight painted the city in warm shades of amber. Inside, the framed photograph found its place on the bookshelf, beside a vase of fresh white lilies. The mirror in the hallway reflected the room behind them. This time, there was no fear. No secret. Only two people standing side by side, smiling at the future that awaited them, while the reflection quietly mirrored exactly what had always been true. Life gradually settled into a rhythm that felt both wonderfully ordinary and quietly extraordinary. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery surrounding the chapel no longer dominated every conversation between Jungkook and Jimin. Instead, it lingered gently in the background, like a favorite melody that never truly faded. Every morning, Jungkook woke before sunrise. It had always been his habit. He brewed 2 cups of coffee, opened the curtains to let the first light spill into the apartment, and watered the vase of white lilies that stood beside the framed photograph from the chapel. At exactly 7 o'clock, Jimin would appear with sleepy eyes and tousled hair. Without fail, he would steal the first sip from Jungkook's mug. You know you have your own. I know. Then why mine? Jimin smiled. It tastes happier. Jungkook always laughed. He never argued. Some habits, he decided, deserved to remain exactly as they were. One quiet Saturday afternoon, they finally decided to renovate the spare room that had become little more than a storage space over the years. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight as they carried out old boxes, forgotten books, and pieces of unused furniture. You keep everything, Jimin teased while lifting a faded cardboard box. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. I might need it someday. You said that about a broken lamp. It had sentimental value. It didn't even work. It still had feelings. Jimin burst into laughter. The sound filled the apartment with an easy warmth that made the walls themselves seem brighter. As they continued cleaning, Jungkook discovered a narrow wooden chest tucked behind an old bookshelf. He frowned. I've never seen this before. Neither had a lock. Neither had a label. Only a carving of intertwined lilies decorated its lid. Jimin immediately recognized the pattern. The same flowers. As the box from the chapel, Jungkook finished. He carefully opened the chest. Inside lay dozens of yellowed papers, bound together with a faded blue ribbon. Sketches. Architectural drawings. Floor plans. Jimin unfolded the largest sheet. His eyes widened. This is a detailed illustration of a small countryside house, surrounded by white rose gardens stretched across the paper. Every room had been lovingly drawn. A music room filled with sunlight. A cozy library. A kitchen overlooking a lake. A greenhouse blooming with lilies. Even a wide wooden porch with 2 rocking chairs. At the bottom of the drawing, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Our home someday." Jungkook slowly sat down. "I know this house." Jimin looked at him. "You remember it?" "No." Jungkook smiled faintly. "I've dreamed about it." He looked around the apartment. "For years." Jimin gently turned another page. This one contained handwritten notes. Jungkook wants large windows. Jimin wants fresh flowers near every doorway. One room should always be filled with music. No matter how busy life becomes, dinner together every evening. Jimin's eyes softened. They wrote about such simple things. Jungkook nodded. Maybe that's what made them important. As they continued reading, neither found grand declarations of eternal devotion. Instead, the pages were filled with ordinary dreams. Weekend breakfasts. Watching rain together. Growing old. Planting trees. Celebrating birthdays. Learning new recipes. Reading books beside the fireplace. Laughing over burnt pancakes. The simplicity made every page more moving than any dramatic love letter could have. Jimin closed the notebook carefully. "I think." He smiled through quiet emotion. "This is the kind of future I want." Jungkook looked at him. "Really?" Jimin nodded. "I don't want a perfect life. I don't want endless excitement. I just want a peaceful home." He reached for Jungkook's hand. "With the person who already feels like home." Jungkook's eyes glistened. "So do I." That evening, they visited a small piece of land overlooking a quiet lake on the outskirts of the city. The real estate agent had described it simply as an empty property with beautiful views. The moment they stepped onto the grassy hill, both stopped walking. The breeze carried the familiar fragrance of lilies. White wildflowers danced beneath the fading sunlight. Far in the distance stood rows of pine trees. Jimin slowly turned in a circle. "I've been here." Jungkook whispered. "I thought the same thing." The landscape matched the old drawings almost perfectly. Not exactly, but close enough to make both of them smile. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Jimin broke the silence. "What ifs?" He laughed nervously. "We stop wondering whether this place belongs to our past." He intertwined his fingers with Jungkook's. "And start building our future instead." Jungkook looked across the quiet hillside. The lake reflected the golden colors of sunset. A gentle wind brushed against their faces. Somewhere nearby, birds settled into the trees for the evening. He smiled. The kind of smile that came only when fear finally surrendered to hope. "I think," he said softly, "that's exactly what we've been waiting for." Together, they stood on the empty land, not searching for forgotten memories anymore, but imagining the laughter, music, and quiet happiness that might one day fill the home they would build there, one ordinary, beautiful day at a time. Construction began on the first day of spring. The empty hillside slowly transformed with the rhythm of hammers, saws, and quiet determination. Morning sunlight painted the framework in warm gold, while the scent of freshly cut cedar drifted through the air. Every beam that rose from the ground felt less like part of a building and more like the unfolding of a dream neither Jungkook nor Jimin had dared to expect. Neither of them hired an architect to redesign the plans. Instead, they carefully followed the old blueprints they had found inside the wooden chest. Not because they believed the drawings belonged to another lifetime, but because the house somehow already felt like theirs. Jimin insisted on planting white lilies before the foundation was even finished. The workers laughed kindly. "They won't bloom yet." "I know," Jimin replied with a smile. "They're learning where home is." Jungkook watched him from across the yard. That simple sentence settled warmly inside his heart. Weeks passed. The wooden porch appeared first. Then the library. Then the music room with its enormous windows overlooking the lake. Every evening after work, the two of them visited the construction site together. Sometimes they discussed furniture. Sometimes they argued playfully over paint colors. Sometimes they simply sat on unfinished wooden beams, watching the sunset. One evening, Jimin arrived carrying a paper bag from a nearby bakery. "I brought dinner." Jungkook peeked inside. "Pancakes. They're slightly burned." "You burned pancakes." "I prefer the phrase, artistically toasted." Jungkook laughed so hard that several workers turned toward them with amused smiles. They sat on the unfinished porch eating imperfect pancakes beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. "You know," Jungkook said between bites, "our notebook mentioned burnt pancakes." Jimin grinned. "I guess some traditions survive." The following month, the house was nearly complete. Only small details remained. Bookshelves waited to be filled. Curtains fluttered gently in open windows. Fresh paint carried the comforting scent of new beginnings. One Saturday afternoon, while arranging books inside the library, Jungkook discovered a narrow space hidden behind one of the built-in shelves. Curious, he reached inside. His fingers brushed against smooth wood. He pulled out a small cedar box. Unlike the others they had found before, this one looked newly made. A tiny brass plaque decorated the lid. It simply read, "Open together." Jimin joined him moments later. "You found another mystery." Jungkook smiled. "I think our house enjoys surprises." They sat on the wooden floor, beneath the large window. Golden afternoon sunlight surrounded them as they carefully opened the lid. Inside rested two sealed envelopes. One bore Jungkook's name. The other belonged to Jimin. Neither envelope looked old. Neither carried faded ink. Instead, the handwriting looked remarkably familiar. Jimin frowned. "This looks like..." Jungkook nodded slowly. "Our own handwriting." They exchanged puzzled glances. Almost simultaneously, they opened their envelopes. Jungkook unfolded his letter first. His eyes widened. It wasn't a message from the past. It was something he himself had written years earlier. The date at the bottom confirmed it. 5 years ago. Long before the chapel. Long before the mysterious memories. Long before he had confessed anything to anyone. He quietly began reading. "If you're opening this, it means you finally found the courage to stop hiding. I don't know what the future will look like, and I don't know whether the person I love will ever know how deeply I care. But if, somehow, we're standing in the home we've always dreamed about, promise me one thing. Don't waste another day being afraid." A tear slipped down Jungkook's cheek. Across from him, Jimin had also fallen silent. His own letter had been written 3 years earlier. He smiled softly while reading. "Sometimes I dream about a peaceful house near a lake. I never understand why the dream feels so real. If I ever find that place, and if someone is standing beside me who makes every ordinary moment feel meaningful, I hope I won't question whether I deserve that happiness. I hope I'll simply accept it." Jimin folded the letter carefully. Then he looked at Jungkook. Neither of them spoke. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Their dreams had never been borrowed from forgotten memories. Even before discovering the chapel, even before learning about the mysterious letter, their hearts had already been moving toward the same future. Jimin laughed quietly. So we were planning this all along. Jungkook smiled. Apparently. Sunlight slowly faded into evening. Outside, the lilies planted months earlier had finally begun to bloom. A soft breeze carried their delicate fragrance through the open windows. Jimin stood and walked onto the porch. The lake reflected hundreds of tiny stars beginning to appear overhead. Jungkook joined him. Together, they watched the peaceful landscape stretching endlessly before them. This house, Jimin whispered. It isn't proof of the past. Jungkook nodded. No. It's proof of the choices we made. He slipped his hand into Jimin's. And the ones we'll keep making. The porch lights flickered on as darkness gently embraced the hillside. Inside the house, shelves waited for books. The music room waited for melodies. The kitchen waited for shared breakfasts. The empty walls waited to be filled with photographs that had not yet been taken. For the first time, neither of them wondered what tomorrow might reveal. Tomorrow no longer felt uncertain. It simply felt like home. Summer arrived with fields of wildflowers surrounding the lakeside house. The lilies Jimin had planted during the first week of construction now bloomed in brilliant white, their fragrance drifting through every open window. Morning sunlight poured across the wooden floors, warming the quiet rooms that had once existed only as pencil sketches on old paper. The house was finally complete. Not perfect, perfectly lived in. Books lined the library shelves. A piano stood beside the wide windows of the music room. The kitchen carried the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread almost every weekend, although Jimin still insisted he was experimenting whenever another batch emerged slightly overcooked. Jungkook never complained. He ate every bite. One peaceful afternoon, they began hanging photographs throughout the hallway. Most were recent. A picture of them laughing beside the lake. Another of Jimin planting lilies while accidentally covering his sweater in dirt. One captured Jungkook holding an umbrella over both of them during an unexpected rainstorm, though they had both ended up soaked anyway. As Jimin reached for another frame, a folded piece of paper slipped from behind it. He frowned. I don't remember putting this here. Jungkook unfolded it carefully. It was a receipt. Old. Very old. From a small antique shop in the neighboring town. The date caught his attention. Exactly 5 years earlier. What did you buy? Jimin asked. Jungkook searched his memory. Then suddenly smiled. I remember. What was it? I bought a mirror. Jimin blinked. The mirror. The one that eventually broke. Jungkook nodded. The shop owner told me something strange when I purchased it. What? He said. Jungkook laughed quietly. That mirrors don't create truth. They reveal the truth people hide from themselves. Jimin smiled thoughtfully. I think he was wiser than he realized. That evening, curiosity led them to visit the antique shop once more. It stood at the edge of an old cobblestone street, exactly as Jungkook remembered. A tiny brass bell chimed as they stepped inside. The scent of aged wood, leather-bound books, and lavender filled the cozy space. Behind the counter stood the same elderly shopkeeper. His silver hair had grown longer, but his warm smile remained unchanged. I wondered when you would return, he said calmly. Jungkook looked surprised. You remember me. The old man chuckled. I remember everyone who buys a mirror with trembling hands. Jimin glanced toward Jungkook. Trembling hands. Jungkook smiled sheepishly. I was nervous. The shopkeeper nodded knowingly. You kept looking at one particular reflection. He gestured toward an empty section of the store. as though someone invisible was standing beside you. Jimin looked at Jungkook. You never told me that. I thought I imagined it. The old man slowly disappeared into a back room before returning with a carefully wrapped package. I've been keeping this. He placed it gently upon the counter. It belongs to you. Jungkook frowned. I've never seen it before. You left it here. When? The day you bought the mirror. Confused, Jungkook untied the ribbon. Inside rested a small leather notebook. Its first page carried his own handwriting. Things I want to tell Jimin someday. His breath caught. I forgot this existed. Jimin looked at him with wide eyes. You wrote this. Years ago. Long before anything had changed. Long before courage had finally found him. Slowly, Jungkook opened to the first entry. Day 1. Today I almost called him my husband while we were shopping. Thankfully, I caught myself before speaking out loud. One day, maybe I won't have to hide those words anymore. Jimin covered his mouth as emotion flooded his expression. Jungkook continued reading. Day 27. He laughed today because I burned breakfast. I pretended to be embarrassed. Truthfully, I'd burn breakfast every morning if it meant hearing that laugh. Another page. Day 112. If love can quietly become someone's home, then I hope I spend the rest of my life building that home for him. Jungkook slowly closed the notebook. His eyes glistened. I never thought anyone would read these. Jimin gently took the notebook from his hands. I'm glad I did. He looked directly into Jungkook's eyes. You know what amazes me? What? Even before any mysterious memories. He smiled warmly. You were already writing our future. The old shopkeeper quietly watched them with kind eyes. You see, he said softly. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive like lightning. He glanced toward the evening sunlight spilling through the front window. Sometimes it grows quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Jungkook and Jimin walked out of the antique shop hand in hand. The notebook rested safely between them. Behind them, the old bell above the door rang one final time. Ahead of them stretched a peaceful road leading back to the lakeside house, a place no longer shaped by secrets, forgotten promises, or unanswered questions, but by the simple decision they made every day to love each other without fear. Autumn arrived gently at the lakeside house. The maple trees surrounding the property transformed into brilliant shades of crimson, amber, and gold. Every morning, fallen leaves gathered along the wooden porch, and Jimin had developed the peculiar habit of refusing to sweep them away immediately. They make the house look alive, he would always say. Jungkook never argued. Instead, he secretly watched from the kitchen window as Jimin wandered barefoot across the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, smiling at the quiet beauty of ordinary mornings. Their lives settled into a comforting rhythm. Jungkook worked in the bright study overlooking the lake. Jimin spent long afternoons filling the music room with gentle piano melodies that drifted through every corner of the house. Sometimes neither of them spoke for hours. Yet silence had become its own language. One cool afternoon, rain arrived unexpectedly. Soft droplets tapped against the windows, while the scent of wet earth drifted indoors. Jimin stood beside the piano, absent-mindedly playing a melody he had never consciously learned. The notes floated through the house with effortless familiarity. Jungkook looked up from the book he had been reading. I know that song. Jimin stopped. I've never played it before. You have. When? Jungkook smiled. In my dreams. Jimin laughed softly. I keep accidentally borrowing your dreams. Or maybe we've always shared them. The melody lingered between them, long after the final note faded. Later that evening, while organizing the library, Jimin discovered another object tucked inside one of the oldest books. It was not a letter, nor a photograph. It was a tiny brass music box. Its surface was engraved with lilies and two simple initials. J. J. He carefully wound the small key. The music box began to play. The melody was identical to the one he had unknowingly performed on the piano only hours earlier. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook. He held out the music box. I've never seen this before. Jungkook listened quietly. His expression softened. My grandmother used to hum this tune. Did she ever tell you where she learned it? No. He gently took the music box into his hands. She only said it belonged to a love story worth protecting. The rain outside grew heavier. Firelight danced inside the living room, filling the house with warm golden light. Jimin sat beside Jungkook on the rug, in front of the fireplace. Do you ever wonder? He paused. Whether we're finally at the end of the mystery. Jungkook looked into the flames before answering. I used to think the mystery was about remembering the past. And now? Now I think it was always about learning not to fear the future. Jimin rested his head gently against Jungkook's shoulder. I like that answer. They remained there listening to the rain. The crackling fireplace. The soft melody still echoing from the music box. Nothing extraordinary happened. No forgotten memories suddenly returned. No mysterious visitors knocked on the door. For once, life allowed them complete peace. Several weeks later, the first snow of the season arrived. White flakes drifted silently over the lake and settled upon the roof, the porch, and the sleeping garden of lilies. Jimin hurried outside despite the cold. You'll freeze, Jungkook called after him. I'll survive. Jimin laughed, stretching out both hands to catch the falling snowflakes. Jungkook followed, carrying two thick scarves. You always forget these. I was distracted. By snow. By happiness. Jungkook wrapped the scarf gently around Jimin's neck. Their eyes met. Tiny snowflakes rested in Jimin's dark hair before quietly melting. You know, Jimin whispered. I finally understand something. What is it? When you whispered, my husband in front of that mirror. He smiled. You weren't trying to imagine a future. Jungkook tilted his head. No. You were speaking to someone you already believed would one day stand beside you. A quiet smile spread across Jungkook's face. I suppose I was. Jimin reached for his hand. And you were right. Together they walked toward the frozen lakeshore. Their footprints stretched behind them across the untouched snow. Side by side. Perfectly parallel. The wind carried the familiar fragrance of lilies from the sleeping garden, mingling with the crisp scent of winter. The house stood warmly illuminated behind them. Its windows glowed softly against the snowy landscape. No longer just a dream. No longer just a promise. It had become the place where every ordinary day quietly proved that the greatest love stories are not measured by dramatic moments, but by countless small ones shared together. Years passed as gently as the changing seasons around the lakeside house. Spring always arrived, with white lilies blooming beneath the porch. Summer filled every open window, with birdsong and warm breezes drifting across the lake. Autumn painted the hills in brilliant shades of amber, while winter wrapped the house in quiet blankets of snow that reflected the soft glow from its windows each evening. The extraordinary slowly became ordinary. And neither Jungkook nor Jimin wished for anything more. Every morning still began the same way. Jungkook woke first. He prepared 2 cups of coffee. Jimin appeared a few minutes later, pretending he had intended to wake up early even though both of them knew otherwise. Without asking, he always reached for Jungkook's cup first. It still tastes happier, he would say with the same smile. Jungkook would laugh every single time. Some traditions deserve to last forever. The library slowly filled with books collected from countless little trips together. The music room echoed with melodies composed on rainy afternoons. The kitchen witnessed hundreds of successful meals, and nearly as many beautifully burned pancakes. Every photograph hanging in the hallway captured an ordinary moment. Planting flowers, watching sunsets, reading beside the fireplace, walking hand in hand through falling snow, laughing until tears filled their eyes over jokes no one else would understand. Looking back, neither of them could remember exactly when the house had stopped feeling new. It had quietly become home. One peaceful evening, many years after they had first visited the old mountain chapel, they returned there once again. The village remained peaceful. The white roses still climbed across the stone walls. The chapel looked almost untouched by time. Inside, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows exactly as it had before. They sat together in the last wooden pew. No mysterious letters waited upon the altar. No forgotten photographs appeared. No hidden secrets remained. Only silence. A comforting, familiar silence. Jimin smiled. I used to think this place held all the answers. Jungkook intertwined their fingers. And now, I think. Jimin looked toward the colorful light spilling across the floor. It simply reminded us to listen to our hearts. Jungkook nodded. I agree. Before leaving, they placed fresh white lilies beside the altar. Not as an offering to the past, but as gratitude for every choice that had led them there, for every fear they had overcome, for every ordinary day that had quietly become extraordinary simply because they had shared it. As they stepped outside, the chapel bell rang softly in the evening breeze. The sound rolled gently across the valley before fading into the mountains. They stood together beneath a sky glowing with the colors of sunset. Jimin glanced toward the mirror hanging near the chapel entrance. Its polished surface reflected them standing side by side. He smiled mischievously. Go on. Jungkook looked puzzled. What? Say it. Jungkook laughed. Here. Why not? There are probably birds listening. They'll keep the secret. Jungkook looked into the mirror. Years earlier, he had stood before another reflection, whispering words he believed no one would ever hear. Back then, they had been filled with longing, with uncertainty, with hope. Today, they carried only quiet joy. He smiled at the reflection before turning toward the person standing beside him. My husband. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation, no secret waiting to be discovered. Jimin's eyes sparkled with warmth. He squeezed Jungkook's hand gently. I'm right here. The evening breeze carried the fragrance of lilies through the valley one final time. Behind them, the chapel stood peacefully beneath the golden sky. Ahead of them stretched a familiar path leading home. Not toward another mystery. Not toward another forgotten promise. Simply toward a life they would continue building together. One sunrise, one conversation, one shared cup of coffee, and one quiet act of love at a time. And perhaps that was the greatest secret of all. Love was never hidden inside an ancient letter. It was never trapped within a mirror. It was never confined to memories of another lifetime. Love revealed itself every single day through kindness, patience, forgiveness, laughter, and the courage to choose the same person again and again. Hand in hand, Jungkook and Jimin walked toward the fading light. Their footsteps disappeared into the quiet road leading home. The mirror reflected only an empty path. But somewhere within its silent glass, the final whispered words remained like a blessing that time itself could never erase. My husband. And this time, the whole world was finally ready to hear them. The end.